Slope is wind 150 degrees, 10 knots. You are cleared immediate takeoff and display.
Welcome to RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, where the International Air Tattoo is celebrating its Silver Jubilee. From small beginnings at North Wheel 25 years ago, this blue-ribboned event in the flying calendar has grown to become the world's biggest military air show. And this year, for the first time, it's been accorded royal status, acknowledging the outstanding work of its organisers, the RAF Benevolent Fund. To date, the show has raised more than £3 million for the Airmen's Charity. Well, for most of the year, Fairford is little used. These days, it's a standby base for the United States Air Force, and often the only aircraft to be found here is the one painted on the hangar. But for one weekend in July, all that changes, as more than 100,000 enthusiasts gather here on the edge of the Cotswolds for one of the great spectacles in aviation. The show has a reputation for introducing new teams and aircraft to the British public. This year is no exception. We'll be looking at the F-5s of the Turkish Stars and their star commentator.
Oh, what a nice appearance! Oh, congratulations, Captain!
Also new in Britain, this brilliant Sukhoi 27 from Ukraine. And a pair of debutantes from Russia, the Albatross jet-powered amphibian. And the Aleutian 38 May, for years the scourge of NATO submarines. In this Jubilee year, 2 British aircraft are themselves celebrating anniversaries. The Spitfire is 60 years old, and the Harrier is exactly half that age, arriving at Fairford with a trainee at the controls.
It's easy, flies itself, really. I didn't really need him, you know what I mean?
All that's coming up later, but first we look at some IAT regulars. Our show commentator is Sean Maffett.
Their regular favourites at International Air Tattoos are the Patrouille de France. They reflect the French national characteristics. They've got the logical precision of their flying manoeuvres, but they've also got that Gallic insouciance and panache. They like turning themselves upside down when they're all in formation, but only bit by bit, until eventually they're left with just the leader flying the right way up. The Patrouille de France is, of course, one of the world's great aerobatic teams, and like the others, they have brilliantly coloured smoke, leaving their trails of streamers in the sky in a sort of horizon-wide aerial ballet. And these are the 2 solos who fly opposition manoeuvres, crossing over at amazing speeds in the middle of the show. And sometimes we see them together heading towards us, but not for very long. Formidable.
This may be the first year the IAT has had a royal title, but visits from royalty are nothing new. Prince Michael of Kent has hardly missed a show. King Hussein of Jordan is another patron. He couldn't come this year, but his son Prince Faisal arrived to meet old associates. These two IAT volunteers met the Prince when he was training.
It's been nice. I've done a lot of continuation training with the RAF, so it's always nice to run into people that you've trained with. It's still big enough that you actually lose track of where people have gone, so it's always nice to catch up with old friends.
Former colleagues remember how in those pilot training days he sharpened his reactions.
Yes, he was very good at computer games in the mess. No one could beat him, so we knew that he was going to be really good at his flying.
And with a high-end and hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
The Prince also met a group of pilots embarking on an ambitious round-the-world flight. They were setting off in two RAF Chipmunks, the trainer now nearing the end of its service life. And this was a flight with a mission.
As you know, international relations have changed. It's now possible to fly across Russia. So our purpose, it's a Royal Air Force expedition, is to establish an air route for light aircraft across Russia so you can fly from Europe to North America without crossing the North Atlantic. They're still Royal Air Force aircraft. They're coming out of operational service, but these are still RAF aircraft and will remain so till the expedition's complete. I've got myself and 4 pilots. There's myself, there's Bill Purchase, Seth Hughes, and David McKenna, and Dave Gill is our technician who's going to provide the necessary support. It's a happy coincidence that it's the 50th anniversary, and this aircraft first flew in 1946 in Canada, so we have a special reason to go to Toronto on our way around the world.
And both Chipmunks, when ready, cleared for immediate takeoff. The surface wind is...
So off round the world the hard way. They hope to be back in time for Farnborough.
Prince Faisal's delighted to wish the Chipmunks bon voyage, but he's probably even more pleased to see his own national team getting airborne. Most national display teams are military, but the Jordanian Falcons are actually part of the Royal Jordanian Airlines, and they don't even fly military aircraft. What they do fly, though, the Extra 300, is one of the best aerobatic aircraft in the world. But although it is a civilian team, the pilots are all Air Force officers. Coming up next, the Hashemite break, reflecting Jordan's proper name of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The solo Captain Omar Bilal does unbelievable things in his Extra 300. He's the Benelux champion and bronze medalist in the British Championships. Later, we'll see him do no less than 20 flick rolls going vertically downwards, but before that, he just tumbles. Over the years, IATs have had national display teams from countries as far afield as Chile and Spain and Slovakia. But this is a team we've never seen before. We've seen the aircraft. The F-5 Freedom Fighter is admirably displayed in the hands of the Swiss team. But the Turkish stars are enjoying their first visit to Britain. Now, the F-5 is not actually the best aircraft you could have for displaying. It's got a rather wide turning circle, and that means it's quite hard to keep it close into the airfield. However, the Turks put up a very creditable show, helped a lot by the circus ring style of their team commentator, Captain Orhan Tamer.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is our joker. His name is Shirley. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. That's enough. Oh, 5. Oh, congratulations, Captain. Main wing starts pulling for looping maneuver. Please, ladies and gentlemen, pay attention, end of the looping, because Captain Shirley and main wing will have a surprise for you. They fight against the gravity despite this they don't move. Okay, very good. Appearance. Ready? Now, Turkish scores, ladies and gentlemen.
Now, we know that some display aircraft specialize in an aerobatic maneuver called a tail slide, but this is not it. But nonetheless, the Turkish stars were made thoroughly welcome, and I'm sure everybody hopes that they'll be back again another year.
Well, if there's one aircraft that needs no introduction, it's this one. The Concorde has a long association with RAF Fairford. It was here in the early 70s that its test program was carried out. Concorde has now been in service for 20 years. Today, it's been chartered for a pleasure trip over the Atlantic, and it's a sellout.
Enjoy the trip. Yeah, see you there. Thank you very much.
These people have paid £495 for what will in most cases be a first experience of supersonic flight. A special day for them, and it's also a special day for this man. Jeremy Rendell has been flying Concorde for more than 18 years, but tomorrow he'll be 55, and that's the age at which British Airways pilots retire. So this will be his last flight.
Jeremy, what are your thoughts today?
Well, mixed emotions really, I suppose. I'm very sad to be leaving this wonderful airplane, but I've had a very good innings, so I suppose I shouldn't complain. I've got plenty more things to do, so...
Happy memories after all this time?
Very many happy memories, yes. It has been a wonderful fleet to be a pilot with.
And in the nearly 20 years you've been doing it, have you had any troubles with her? Has she been good?
Considering what a complicated airplane it is, very few problems at all. I did have an engine failure leaving Singapore about 15 years ago, which the airplane copes with very well. We're well trained for that sort of thing. But that's about it, really. Very, very little. I had a tyre burst about two years ago. Almost nothing.
Your colleagues fly all around the world for British Airways, but Concorde has a limited route. Do you ever feel sometimes that you've been left out on other exotic locations?
Well, sometimes, but on the other hand, we do go to exotic places now and again. But yes, I suppose New York all the time might sound a little bit tedious, but the airplane more than makes up for that, so I'm very happy to have done what I've done.
Jeremy Rendell making his last Concorde flight as captain. And from one Concorde captain to another, though he's flying a very different type of aircraft today. Ken Snell, that's him on the far side, has a day job with British Airways. His other love is the Vickers Vimy. In fact, this is a replica Vimy completed 2 years ago at a cost of more than £500,000. Designed as a bomber, a Vimy flown by Alcock and Brown became the first aircraft to cross the Atlantic in 1919. This one is owned by an American banker, Peter Macmillan. It's already been to Australia. Later this year, Ken will be taking it to Cape Town. But the Vimy's flight turned out to be quite eventful. Just after takeoff, Ken reported that he had an engine problem and appeared to be losing height. The Vimy turned back and flew a low circuit.
Runway downwind to land on the hard with the services standing by.
The landing itself was uneventful, most of the crowd unaware that anything was wrong. But then Ken had to summon willing hands to push the aircraft back to its hangar. Clearly something was seriously amiss.
Well, we were climbing out quite normally with full power on both engines, and suddenly there was a slight power loss on the right engine, and rather a wise move, I think, just to continue and fly a normal circuit and land the airplane back on the runway and make sure everything's normal. Really wasn't worth taking any risks to complete the display. I'd rather just get the airplane back on the ground.
Could you have flown her on one engine?
Just about, yeah. The airplane will maintain height on one engine. But it's a big struggle, and the air is particularly hot today, so it would have been very hard work. The right engine picked up again, and I thought, right, continue fly circuit and get the airplane on the ground.
In fact, Ken, in his typically modest way, had played down a very serious incident. Later, he admitted that he'd decided to land in a field when the engine picked up just enough to get him back to the runway. These pictures from our onboard camera clearly show the revs dropping on the right engine. But look at this. Just after landing, the left engine fails too and couldn't be restarted. It was all put down to problems with the fuel pumps. Hopefully it'll be all right before they head off for Cape Town later in the year.
Now here's a team that hasn't been to IAT for quite a while, but it's good to welcome them back. We catch up with them in our Hawk chase aircraft as they're en route into Fairford. They haven't changed their aircraft in the meantime. The little Saab 105 SK60 trainers are beginning to look quite old-fashioned and somehow rather tubby with their side-by-side seating. They do actually date from the early 60s. The three crowns of the Swedish Air Force crest. But once they get airborne, they prove that they've lost none of their Swedish precision. This is, in fact, their 20th anniversary year as a team. And the word written along the top of the wing there, in case you can't see it, is Flygvapnet, which means just Air Force. Another good pilot's eye view with a clear idea of that side-by-side seating from our in-cockpit camera. here's a spot of bother. Colonel Nikolai Koval of the Ukrainian Air Force is winding up the two huge Lyulka turbofans on his Su-27, but watch the aeroplane behind. There's nobody in that one. I suppose you could say it's an example of the Ukrainians blowing the Brits away. And the aircraft with all hands to the pump is the RAF Solo Display Hawk. But safely airborne, the Su-27, the flanker in NATO notation, demonstrates how powerful those engines are, and in fact how tough, because the Colonel performs a tail slide, which you can't do with Western jet engines. This aircraft is actually going backwards at the moment, and with Western jet engines, airflow going backwards up the engine tends to make them stop. Not so with the strongly built Russian jets. The audience is fascinated because this is the first time the Ukrainians have been to a British air show, and they've brought their aircraft in a magnificent colour scheme. But it is indeed a very warlike creature. Its maximum gross all-up weight is something over 30 tons, so it's no small aeroplane.
Well, one of the regular IAT display teams are not pilots at all, although some might say they are flyers. Modern parachutes don't just fall, they cut through the air like a wing, and meeting the ground is not much different from landing an aircraft. It's been a busy year for the Falcons. Among many high-profile displays, this drop into Wembley Stadium for England's semi-final in Euro 96. Now, with 100 shows a season, you might think the Falcons don't need to practice, but every drop is different. Before takeoff from RAF Bryce Norton, they run through their routine. When you jump out of a plane more than 2 miles above the ground, you don't want anything to go wrong.
Please make sure that you're pulling your smoke, okay, and you're getting out of the aircraft behind the person in front of you, i.e. if it's a lead tracker, okay, he dictates the aim. Okay, really go for it today. Okay, good dive back. Okay, get back in plenty of time. I'm looking for around about a 8,000 foot fall today, okay?
And this is the scene on board their jump plane as the C-130 Hercules runs in for the drop at Fairford. This will be their biggest audience of the season.
After their free fall, all 12 of them have their canopies successfully opened. The canopies are actually something called a Fury, 224 square feet of it. They also carry a reserve parachute. It's called a Raver. It's slightly bigger than the main one, but it's not so maneuverable. And each of the jumpers also carries 2 altimeters, one on his left wrist and one on his chest. There they've split the stack into 2 so that they can make nice different shapes in the sky. And they rejoin again about 1,000 feet later and start the spiraling. They can fly these canopies just like an aeroplane. They can go about 20 miles an hour forwards, and just like an aeroplane, you pull on the controls and slow the thing up and land it, and you're just doing a little run and you're completely stopped, and with any luck you won't have fallen over. Whilst they're getting their parachutes together, the aircraft from which they jumped a couple of minutes ago and 12,000 feet higher up comes by for a fly past. Well, the Falcons are one of the RAF's 3 display teams. Here's another, the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and the airmen sitting on the tailplanes of these aircraft are there to steady them whilst they're doing their power checks so that they can run the engine up without the possibility of lifting the tail off the ground. And practically getting the aircraft airborne before they're ready. So this is the arrival of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, with the Lancaster in front, the Hurricane on the right, and the Spitfire on its left. As they get to the end of the display line, they do a gentle breakaway for their 3 solo displays. Spitfire's on first, actually the oldest airworthy Spitfire in the world, P7350. She's thought to be the 14th aircraft built at Castle Bromwich, and she came into service in 1940. She flew during the Battle of Britain. She was involved in combat with Messerschmitt 109s and was actually forced to crash land. And close to, you can still see the repaired bullet holes. Next is the Hurricane, PZ865. She was actually the last Hurricane of 14,500 to be built. And while she was being built, there was a banner hung over the workshops which said, "Last of the many." And the inscription's actually still on the port side of the aircraft. And a nice victory roll there. Leading us into the solo display of the Lancaster. It was the grand old man of British aviation, Sir George Edwards, who described it as an aircraft designed by engineers and built by craftsmen and women for heroes to fly. And there we see the great bomb doors open. She's in the colour scheme nowadays of an aircraft of 9 Squadron, an aircraft that took part in the first attack on the battleship Tirpitz, and an aircraft which flew more than 100 operational sorties. Extremely difficult aircraft to land gently is the Lancaster, with those big wheels on which it's only too easy to bounce. I'm reminded of the engineer shouting up to the pilot, "Which of those landings would you like logged, sir?" And as the old warbirds of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight finish their show, the stage is taken by the modern-day Royal Air Force. And there's an interesting link, because this little tiny Jaguar fighter bomber actually carries half the bomb load of the enormous old Lancaster. An indication of how small it is comes when you compare it with the Tornado in the foreground here, with interestingly some of the Russian MiGs and Sukhois in the background there. But the size of the Jaguar's wing is the same as the size of the Tornado's tailplane. And as the RAF Tornado takes off, you can see the reheat coming in on the Turbo Union RB199 engines. 15,000 pounds of static thrust from each of them. Tornado, a swing-wing aircraft. You can see the wings sweeping to their fully swept-back position there, making the thing look much more dart-like. And changing now to the little Hawk trainer, the advanced trainer of the RAF, the same aircraft that the Red Arrows use, but this is the RAF solo display Hawk, in these rather elegant colours from RAF Valley, with the red dragon on the tail. Now, the Hawk is a 2-seat trainer, but it has 1 seat behind the other, which is the modern way of doing things. The old Saabs that we saw earlier have the seats side by side, and the Jet Provost is just the same. It's about the same age. But whilst the Saab is still in service, the Jet Provosts are all out of service use. These are civilian ones, and we're now in the cockpit with Bob Thompson, who's the number 2 in this Gosh That's Aviation team of a pair of Jet Provosts. And that's Tom Maloney that he's formating with in the other aircraft. These aircraft used to be the basic trainers of the Royal Air Force. In fact, the RAF used to boast that it was the only Air Force that had all-through training on jets. Nowadays, of course, it's gone back to having propeller-driven aircraft, the turboprop Tucano, instead of these Jet Provosts. Back in the cockpit with Bob Thompson, watch the Earth move as he does a roll. Throttle opening, power coming up, wing going down, horizon going down, horizon and sky the wrong way up. As we catch the sun glinting on that paintwork, it's nice to reflect that these aircraft are being looked after so well after their service life. I often think the look of these machines epitomizes what Reagan called the evil empire. Or then again, perhaps they look like those multifaceted eyes of the housefly magnified 100 times to terrify the children. But despite all that sinister ugliness, the Hinds produce a spellbindingly graceful aerial dance. It's a huge helicopter. The 5-bladed rotor is nearly 18 metres in diameter. That's not far short of a cricket pitch in size. And those stub wings underneath, they can carry things like anti-tank missiles, rocket pods, bombs, cluster bombs even, and the big gun at the front directed by the helmet-mounted gun sight of the crew. But unlike the Western attack helicopters, these ones can also carry troops inside at the same time. Quite an extraordinary machine. There's certainly nothing like it in the West, but there is the British Army's Lynx, and behind that the Gazelles of the Army Air Corps display team. Team members have been doing some good East-West liaison with the Czechs in the run-up to the show. So now it's time for the visitors to cast a critical eye over the home team's performance. Like the so-called fixed-wing teams, the Blue Eagles have their photogenic brakes. And of course, in the helicopter world, there's nothing as agile as a Lynx. It seems that each time the little Gazelle does something exciting, the Lynx tries to better it. Finally ending up with the Lynx flying straight through the Gazelle's neat diamond formation.
Besides the various anniversaries marked by the show, each IAT has a theme. It's a chance to bring together airmen from all over the world who work in the same field of aviation but would normally have little contact with each other. This year's theme is Sea Search, and that covers everything from maritime rescue and fishery protection to hunting and destroying submarines. As always here, there's a big American presence. This C-130 Hercules from the US Air Force, this one from the National Guard. Men from this unit were involved in the fruitless search for survivors from the TWA 747 disaster off Long Island. They're also on standby for every launch of the space shuttle.
We go down to Kennedy Space Center each shuttle launch, and we're either on a airborne or a ground alert at Patrick Air Force Base. If we're on an airborne alert, it's out 200 miles out to sea, 15,000 feet. We're in an orbit. We have 3 Zodiac boats that are bundled up with our pararescuemen in the event that the shuttle has a problem and it's a controlled bailout situation, the astronauts go out. We would be probably one of the first ones on scene. We could deploy our Zodiac boats and our pararescue men to the astronauts. In the meantime, we would have the helicopters coming out from the Cape being escorted and air refueled by other tankers that are there, and we would all kind of come together. Our pararescue men would assist in the hoisting of the survivors, which in this case would be the astronauts, onto the H-60s and then bring them back to shore.
The crews take part in a concours d'élégance, and it's quite a job to prepare a working aircraft for the judges. The eventual winners, this C-130 crew from South Africa. Their Air Force celebrated its 75th anniversary last year, and the aircraft is still in its Jubilee paint scheme.
Last year, our Air Force was 75 years old, and we had the International Air Show to commemorate that. And we were planning to take off the special paint scheme already, but when we were invited to England to this show, we decided to keep it on.
But of all the Sea Surge aircraft, it was once again the Russians who stole the show. This is the Beriev A-40 Albatross, the world's first jet-powered amphibious aircraft seldom seen in the West. At the moment, it's still under development. In service, it's expected to carry 3 torpedoes and up to 6 anti-submarine missiles. But its makers also see it as an amphibious airliner for around 100 passengers. And this is the Ilyushin 38, or May as it's known under the NATO coding system. It's never been to Britain before. For many years, the May was seen as one of the main threats to NATO shipping and submarines, though before the fall of the old Soviet Union, little was known about it. By today's standards, the May represents old technology. Some 40 of the aircraft remain in service. A warm welcome for the Russian crew in more ways than one. They'd flown from a damp and chilly Kaliningrad to a Fairford basking in 27 degrees of heat. There were free beers from the local brewery and smiles all round. Like most of the airmen, the captain spoke no English, but then he'd never needed to.
Despite the fact that he is a captain of Ilyushin 38 for many years, and he flew this aircraft in Norway Sea. He served in Northern Fleet, you know. He saw a lot of foreign helicopters, aircraft, ships, submarines, etc., but he never been abroad. It's for the first time he is here.
And it seemed their first impressions were favorable.
Your air traffic controllers were very hospitable to us. Yeah, and your airfield is beyond our description.
The May's logo depicts an albatross and shark. One presumes the shark is a NATO submarine. It's known that the aircraft can carry a single nuclear depth charge or 2 conventional depth bombs, but it does have peaceful roles. It's used in rescue operations and can also guide the Russian fishing fleet to the best catches. Some of its duties may eventually be taken over by the amphibious A-40, and this is an aircraft its makers, Beriev, would very much like to sell abroad. Certainly one of the most interesting planes on show.
I think quite a lot of people were disappointed that the Russians didn't take part in the flying display, but instead remained on the ground as part of the static show. These aircraft, however, were there as a splendid pair demonstrating the early years of maritime flying. These 2 string bags, as they're affectionately known, belong to the Royal Naval Historic Flight, and indeed here we see one with a torpedo underneath, reflecting back to the kind of armaments that the May, for instance, could carry. Back up to date with the West's equivalent of the May. This is the P3C2 Orion of the Royal Netherlands Navy, with its magnetic anomaly detector, Mad Sting, sticking out of the back of the aircraft, doing a spirited display and keeping the crew on their toes in the meantime, and in fact looking almost immaculate enough to win the Concorde d'Elegance, seen here filmed from our Hawk chase aircraft. And this is the RAF's version of the same thing, the jet-powered Nimrod, in fact shortly due to be replaced. And the decision has been made that it will not be replaced by a P3 Orion, but by another new model of the Nimrod. Gavin's been to a Nimrod station to see the aircraft in operational service.
RAF Lossiemouth on the shore of the Moray Firth. A temporary home for 206 Squadron, while the runway at nearby Kinloss is being resurfaced. A Nimrod crew comprises 13 men. Today, a 5 o'clock start and briefing for an exercise off the coast of Ireland.
Transit's one stage from Edinburgh to Aberdeen and then back to Lynham. Shouldn't be a flare. Station diversion is Lucas at the moment, or will be, £6,600. Minoff task fuel, £22,300 from the southwest corner. Obviously I'll update that once I know exactly where we're operating. We can probably do that 20 miles. Yeah? Okay.
The Nimrod is loaded with equipment to assist its primary role of detecting submarines. This is what's known as the BOS pod, for dispensing chaff and flares. It's connected to this sensor, which detects incoming missiles. On the wingtips, the ESM pods, electronic support measures for detecting enemy radar. Under the right wing, the aircraft's Sandpiper infrared detection system. The tubes near the tail are for dropping sonar buoys, which send radio signals back to the aircraft.
I'll make those.
Despite its age, the Nimrod will continue in its maritime role well into the next century. A few days after the IAT, the government announced an order for 21 updated aircraft. The Nimrod 2000 will have new wings and engines, glass cockpit avionics, and a major upgrade of its surveillance and weapons systems. In this exercise with a Canadian frigate, the crew are dropping sonar buoys to locate an imaginary submarine. The Nimrod is not always a comfortable aircraft. Indeed, it has a reputation for causing air sickness. But despite its age, the crews have a lot of respect for it.
Most of the fast jet aircraft have been required to keep abreast of technology in the airframe side as well as the equipment side. The platform that we require is basically a strong, steady, reliable platform. Nimrod has shown itself to be that, and with improvements of technology with the navigation equipment, acoustic and radar equipment, we can actually fit the new equipment into the older airframe without incurring the horrendous development costs of a completely new airframe.
With the updates that they have in mind, we'll thankfully in the flight deck in particular come up to the 1990s. As you can see around you, that's a very antiquated flight deck, and I'll quite enjoy flying the new Nimrod.
Pilots find the present Nimrod quite demanding.
Very heavy on the controls and very unstable in pitch, although when you get used to it, it can be very smooth, and although the back end won't agree with you, very comfortable as well. It's probably one of the most challenging aircraft I've flown in the Air Force, and I've actually flown quite a few. Because it is so out of date, if I can use that term, it does provide the added skill required to fly it.
The Nimrod has another important role in search and rescue. But last year, one crew had to be rescued themselves. At Fairford, they were reunited with the crew of an RAF Sea-King helicopter, which winched them from the North Sea. The Nimrod had turned back to Lossiemouth with a fire in its number 4 engine, but the pilot was forced to ditch.
The reports that were coming to me of the wing on fire, melting, panels blowing off the wing, etc., and my own experience of feeling the aircraft shudder and a major explosion deep within the aircraft, I believe that the aircraft was either going to blow up in the air or I would lose control of it on the way down. Hence my decision to ditch the aircraft. We seem to go down and down and down, and the horizon, I've flown low over the sea before, but not that low. And the horizon seems suddenly to go way, way above us. And then when we finally impacted, we hit tail first because we were flapless. We bounced a couple of times, and the noise, I think, was the feature that will live with me forever. The sound of metal tearing and glass breaking, although none of the panels in the flight deck actually broke. It seemed to go on for forever, but suddenly it stopped. The aircraft came to a rest, and the noise stopped, and that was the big feature. I looked behind, Dave Rimmer, the engineer, was moving. I looked across at Pat, the co-pilot, and he was starting to get out of his seat. And at that stage, I thought, well, at least 3 of us had made it.
I've got to admit, it was a lot lower in the sky than I thought it would be. I would estimate it was probably about 200 feet at the time when I saw it, and there was a massive fire on the right-hand side with smoke trailing behind it. And shortly after that, I heard on the radio the call, ditching, ditching, ditching. And when it went down, to be honest, I thought we were going to see perhaps bits of wreckage. But lo and behold, there was this Nimrod sitting bobbing on the water. So it's probably about 2 minutes after they hit the water that I came alongside, and I think they just all get in the dinghy and were starting to move away. I was quite prepared to put the winchman in immediately, but Art's crew waved me away, which I thought at the time, a bit rude, I've come to rescue them.
I wouldn't say wave. Bob and I know what we mean by waved away, but we indicated that it wasn't a good idea at that stage to come in, and she was pushing us back onto the fuselage.
It wasn't until my winchman was put into the dinghy, he very quickly radioed back that all 7 was safe and well. And it certainly took some of the pressure off us.
For his outstanding airmanship, Art Stacey was awarded the AFC. He's still flying the Nimrod.
For many years, the Patrouille Suisse were the only national aerobatic team flying the magnificent old Hawker Hunter. And here they are in this lovely view from our Hawk chase plane over a cloud-dappled landscape, with just one of the old Hunter aircraft flying alongside the F-5s that they now have in this brilliant red and white colour scheme. They're celebrating 32 years as a team, and they fly together in an immaculate precision formation, sometimes as little as 10 feet between the aircraft. That's the formation shape they call Concorde as part of their display. And here, the Swiss cross, which you can see reflected on the underside of the aircraft.
So what's it like to carry out a flying display in a fast jet? Well, now we're going to find out. We're going to ride with Frank Javorek and his navigator Stefan Jutten in the German Navy Tornado GR1. Javorek agreed to take our camera mounted on his head, and he's going to take us through their show routine.
King, you are cleared immediate takeoff and display.
Releasing the brakes, accelerating to 100 knots and lifting the nose up. Getting airborne at about 140 knots. Cleaning up the aircraft, getting the gear in, using all combat power you have. Getting the flaps up at 220 and accelerating just the aircraft straight. Getting the nose up 20 degrees and reaching 500 feet. I do a left roll in for the repositioning maneuver. Always using afterburner all the time. Rolling out, getting the wings to 45 degrees, speeding up to 450 knots. Speed now is about 550 knots, pulling the nose up, demonstrating a straight pop gun attack, acquiring the target on the top, and a left turnout. And sweeping the wings from 67 to 25, and a left turnoff. Right repositioning. Getting out the refueling probe on the right side, you see it here. Slowing the aircraft more down for the next maneuver, which is a slow flight. Configuring the aircraft with the flaps to mid first, then the gear down at 250 knots, and the flaps full at 220 knots. Slowing more down to using max AOA you can use. And weaving the aircraft left to right, demonstrating the maneuverability of the Tornado.
Well, as in most years, there's been no lack of fast jets at the show, from light trainers to heavyweights, like the Su-27 and the Tornado. Here's a look at some of the others.
Although the big jets are always dramatic, some of the smaller aeroplanes pack an amazing punch. The power-to-weight ratio of these extra 300s is enough to get them from 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. In fact, I suppose it's true to say that the extra is to conventional aeroplanes what Grand Prix cars are to family saloons. But if you thought that takeoff performance of 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds was good, in these manoeuvres they go from 0 to 200 miles an hour in 5 seconds. The Rover team are one of the few directly sponsored teams on display, but Rover are also sponsors of IAT as a whole. Anyway, the visibility for the corporate name is pretty obvious on Brian Lacombe's aircraft here. And also for Rover's MG subsidiary on Alan Wade's aircraft. And the team's final wing-down flyby exhibits the same crisp professionalism that high-spending sponsors demand.
The old Battle of Britain base at North Weald in Essex. The RAF moved out years ago, and though it's still used by a few private aircraft, you get the feeling that its glory days are gone. This, though, was the home of the very first IAT 25 years ago. In those days, it was simply called the Air Tattoo. At that first show, there were just 45 aircraft, including the Patrie de France and their Fougueux Magisters. They've been coming ever since. Two of the men who organised that first show are still running it today. Paul Bowen and Tim Prince have given the IAT an international reputation, but even in the early days, they say it wasn't difficult to attract foreign participants.
I have one memory of suggesting that we went to the Austrian Air Force, and everyone in the Ministry of Defence had said, no, that's a total waste of time. They've got 30 aeroplanes and they've never left Austria. We wrote the letter, and we had a lovely letter back that said, yes, we'd love to come. Nobody's ever invited us to anything. And it's really built from that. And I think why perhaps it's been so successful is that Tim and I over the years have got to know the young pilots who are now the chiefs of the Air Force around the world. So we have many friends all over the world, and I think they know what they're sending their airplanes to.
The show soon outgrew its first home. In 1973, it moved to RAF Greenham Common near Newbury. Many of the aircraft which drew the early crowds are no longer flying today. The Lightning, the RAF's first supersonic interceptor. The Vulcan, last of the 3 V-bombers. It was designed to deliver a nuclear weapon deep into the Soviet Union. The Victor, another V-bomber which eventually became a tanker. And the KC-97, an early American air-to-air refueler. But some of the most exciting arrivals have been in recent years. The Russian aircraft whose presence in British airspace would once have been unthinkable. For years seen only from the cockpit of NATO interceptors, they finally came to make friends.
That day, 3 years ago, when the Russian Bear arrived, escorted by 2 Tornadoes, that was really it. We were delighted with that one. I suppose that's the abiding memory.
Since 1985, the IAT has been held here at Fairford. Now come of age, the show is the biggest source of income for the RAF Benevolent Fund. But in its Silver Jubilee year, Paul Bowen points out that he's not just after your admission fee.
You also have to recognise that it's not just the straight financial gain to the fund, the awareness it creates of the charity through television, through public attendance and everything else, is worth a tremendous amount in terms of legacies and all the other things that a charity depends on for its existence.
Well, there are just 2 pilots here who took part in the original Air Tattoo at North Weald, and here's one of them. Ray Hanna has been flying his Mark 9 Spitfire since 1970. As for the aircraft itself, the Spit is also celebrating an anniversary. This year marks its Diamond Jubilee.
My first flight was my best memory. It was wonderful to have the privilege to fly a Spitfire in this country.
Does it get any easier?
No, not at all. It is a very easy aeroplane to fly. It's a beautiful aeroplane to fly. And I think of all the aeroplanes on the air show scene, other than the high-speed noisy jets, it has the greatest following.
There's a predominance of noisy jets, isn't there, lately?
There certainly is at this show today, but that's what it's all about.
Do you think that's what the crowd wants?
Yes, mostly.
You don't feel that some hanker for the displays of yesteryear?
Oh, perhaps some of them, but the greatest percentage, I think, are looking for noisy military airplanes.
But of all the celebrations in 1996 of the Spitfire's 60th birthday, this one's unique. The piston-engine, propeller-driven Spitfire leads the 9 jets of the Red Arrows. Even the sound is extraordinary. And as Ray Hanna pulls his Spitfire up and out of formation, he's reflecting, perhaps, on the time when he himself was leader of the Red Arrows. Ever since that time, the main part of the Red show has always started with their basic Diamond 9 shape. After that, changes come thick and fast, with shapes representing well-known aerospace icons like Concorde and Apollo. One of the most spectacular parts of the show comes when the team is in 2 bits. Watch for the first 5 flying towards us, and then the other 4 in this amazing maneuver obscurely named Jippo Break. The Reds have had an interesting couple of seasons. During last winter, when they should have been back at their base, dreaming up exciting new manoeuvres and training up the 2 newcomers to the team, they were actually on what amounted to a world tour, taking in Australasia and the Far East. And then they went away again in mid-season this year for another overseas tour, both jaunts being paid for by the British aviation industry as marketing exercises. At the end of the season, Red leader, Squadron Leader John Rands, leaves after a highly successful 3 years in charge, and his place is taken by Squadron Leader Simon Meade, like all Red leaders, an ex-Red Arrow himself.
Well, the Red Arrows fly the flag for Britain, and here's an aircraft that's been doing just that for 30 years. The Harrier, in its many variations, is one of Britain's most successful exports, now developed by McDonnell Douglas of America. This is the T-10 trainer version flying into Fairford from its base at RAF Wittering. Most fast jet pilots train in their early 20s, but not quite all. The Follow Me van provides a clue. In fact, David Jason has done a bit of flying in his time, mostly on gliders.
It's easy, flies itself, really. I didn't really need him, you know what I mean?
This, of course, was a bit of fun for the press, though on this special anniversary for the aircraft, most of the Harrier top brass were here.
Bill Bedford, must be familiar to you.
And you, sir?
I had the misfortune to do the first flight 100 years ago.
Did you really?
So why you should stick your neck in it, I can't possibly imagine.
The star of many TV series, Jason had clearly enjoyed his flight.
I think the most complicated part of it all really was the kitting up and the briefing, because you've got to be briefed about, emergency procedures and all the paraphernalia in the cockpit. But you've got to get this all this kit on. I mean, it looks pretty professional. I mean, I think I might wear it all the time.
And he did get a chance to fly the aircraft.
I was very fortunate that he had enough confidence in me to allow me to fly, to take control. And that's when it really gets exciting. I mean, when you feel that machine respond and it's in your hands, there is also a slight fear factor, if that's the right word. Meaning, your response. If you did something really stupid, I mean, that would be the end of it. So there's a bit of adrenaline flowing. Exciting, yeah, lovely.
And the inevitable question, what would Dell have done with a Harrier?
Well, he wouldn't have got out of it, would he? He would have probably flown it to some third world country and flogged it.
It's the only way to travel.
For only half of what it's really worth. That is one hell of a machine.
And so to the finale. It's a singular thought that in this year when we're celebrating 60 years of the Spitfire, we're actually celebrating no less than 30 years of the Harrier and all the vertical takeoff flight concepts that it includes. There were aircraft from all four of the RAF's Harrier squadrons involved in this whole demonstration. Say number 1 Fighter Squadron and number 20 Reserve Squadron from Wittering, and number 3 Fighter and 4 Army Cooperation Squadron from Larbrook. Here's the pilot's eye view of an attack building up. The head-up instrumentation giving the pilot all he needs to know without having to take his eyes off the target. The target in this case being an operations centre in a rebel-held village right in the middle of the airfield. The 10 aircraft attack from different directions, which is quite realistic. They would make their run-ins from as many different directions as they could. They come by in 2 sections of 4 from each direction. And then when the final attack has been made, there's a short gap. And then 2 reconnaissance aircraft fly through to assess the damage to the target. But in fact, in the middle of the demonstration, there's a slight problem. One of the aircraft, in this case it's actually a 2-seat T-10 aircraft, one of the trainer aircraft, has hit a bird. Now, we don't think there's serious damage, but it was serious enough for the pilot to decide that he had to come in and have the thing looked at. In the meantime, though, the Rebel Operations Centre has been destroyed and the troops are called in. And Hercules aircraft come in on a tactical air landing operation. We'll see the aircraft go into reverse pitch, stop very quickly, The ramps come down, and out come the troops in their scimitar light tanks and a Land Rover with a general purpose machine gun on it. That's for mopping up the bits of the rebel operation that the Harriers couldn't manage to do. And within less than a minute, the Hercules is off again, not staying on the ground any longer than he absolutely has to. Meanwhile, the engineers are getting a look at this T-10 Harrier that's had the bird strike. Seems to have hit it on the intake on the right-hand side. I'm not sure whether it's gone into the engine, but probably it hasn't from the look of where the dent is. And there doesn't appear to be too much serious damage, except, of course, to the bird. Well, after the tactical demonstration of what Harrier does, it's time for a bit of formation flying. And alongside us in the formation is a two-seat T-10 aircraft. You can see the longer cockpit there to accommodate the two seats. And in fact, these pictures are taken from another T-10 from the observer's seat. Now this, of course, is Harrier performing as a fast jet, but it can, of course, take off vertically and land vertically. Here, one of the early test pilots on Harrier, John Farley, explains how you get an aeroplane like this to come vertically off the ground.
You've taken the precaution of pointing the four nozzles down at the ground, and you do that by moving the one control that is in a Harrier cockpit that is not in anybody else's jet fighter. It's called the nozzle lever. And it sits alongside the throttle on the left-hand side. Push it forward, the nozzles go aft. Pull it back, the nozzles go down. And you can pull it back as fast as you like, as hard as you like, and it'll just stop with the nozzles pointing straight down. Like that, the engine thrust is pointing straight at the ground. So you're sitting on the ground. If you want to do a vertical takeoff, get hold of the nozzle lever, yank it back. Put your hand on the throttle and just place it fully forward. The engine will wind up, the thrust will build up. When it exceeds your weight, you'll just leave the ground. And you've only got one other thing to do at that time, and that's to keep yourself flat. If you let a wing go down, then obviously the engine will also point to one side, you know, and the airplane will start going sideways. So if you want to stay where you are, you must keep the airplane flat. And you use your stick just like a hunter pilot would in flying straight and level, when he keeps the airplane flat. And you move it forwards and backwards to keep the airplane flat in pitch as well. And although your aerodynamic surfaces are not doing any good in the hover, which is what you're moving with your right hand, because there's no wind going over them, at the end of each aerodynamic surface is a little rod which operates a reaction control, a little puffer jet at the wingtips, the nose and tail of the airplane. So the pilot doesn't have anything extra for reaction controls. He waves these aerodynamic controls around in the hover, and the little puffer jets do their thing and control your attitude. It really is that easy.
And John Farley ought to know, because he's been flying Harriers and their predecessors longer than almost anyone. Now, the wonderful thing about Harriers is that as well as being an amazingly sharp operational aircraft, they're also incredibly good circus performers, and all good circus acts end with a deep bow.
Well, that display by the Harriers concludes the show, but the day's far from over for the air crews and the many hundreds of RAF volunteers who make the IAT possible. When the flying stops, the party begins.
Godfather know. Hey, she's having a good time at the air show party.
When pilots get together, they talk about two things, and one of them is aircraft. So we asked them which were their favourites.
The heights. Being a helicopter pilot, we've spent most of our life being frightened of them. Now that the wall's gone down, it's nice to see them face to face, as it were.
Sukhoi 27, I think.
I like very much Sukhoi 27. It can perform many strange maneuvers.
I think Red Arrows aircraft.
The best aerobatic team for me was the Red Arrows. It was the best show.
I enjoyed the Swiss team that gave the aerobatic display. Good team, they had good formation grouping and they flew a good formation display.
Well, the Spitfire was pretty exciting. That's an excellent airplane. It's really nice to see that people are keeping up and keeping these aircraft flying so to preserve our history, as it were.
The views of some of the airmen at Fairford this weekend. But the show also has some official favourites. In a giant hangar, they've been handing out awards. The trophy for the best solo jet performance in Nikolai Kozal of Ukraine for his stunning show in the Sukhoi 27. Best overall flying demonstration, the Swedish Saab Team 60. Best display by overseas pilots, the French Jaguar pair, Lieutenants Proud and Boutron. And for the best British display, the doyen of pilots, Brian Lacombe. He almost dropped his winner's sword, but then it is almost as big as him. Brian and his fellow barnstormer Alan Wade make up the two-ship rover team in their extra 300s. So with the Airmen's Party still in full swing, that's all from Fairford on this, the Silver Jubilee of the Royal International Air Tattoo. No doubt they're already looking forward to next year.